Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Table Talk Sessions, the True Crime Chronicles. Table Talk Sessions is about having authentic conversations. So I hope that by sharing some of these crimes or cases that it will generate not only conversations, but us being more cognizant to the relationships and friendships that we entertain. And of course, watching for those red flags. In today's episode, we delve into the chilling case of Lori Vallow Daybell, dubbed the Doomsday Mom. We'll explore the tragic events surrounding the disappearance and the homicide of her two children, the death of her husband's first wife, and the bizarre beliefs that fueled these crimes. Let's go.
And disturbing details came out today in the Lori Vallow Daybell murder trial about how her two children were killed. The forensic pathologists who did their autopsies testified. Lori Vallow is charged with murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and grand theft in the deaths of her two kids, JJ and Tylee. Vallow is also charged with conspiracy and theft in the death of her husband, Chad Daybell's late wife, Tammy. News Channel 7's Shira Matsuzawa was at the Ada County Courthouse today. She walks us through what came out in court.
Explosive and graphic new details regarding how JJ and Tylee died came out today in court, and we learned those new details as a forensic pathologist took the stand. Dr. Garth Warren with the Ada County Coroner's Office conducted the autopsy on JJ and Tylee on June 11, 2020, just 2 days after investigators found their remains on their mother's fifth and current husband Chad Daybell's property. Warren says JJ's autopsy took about 4 hours. Tylee's took about a week because, as we've reported, her remains were burned. Today, Warren revealed JJ's cause of death was asphyxia by plastic bag over the head and duct tape over the mouth. When he described Tylee's cause of death, he said it was homicide by unspecified means, which means he can't pinpoint exactly what that was. Today, jurors were shown photos from those autopsies, but only the jury. The judge said those photos would be inappropriate to show the public because of the graphic nature and out of concern that the projector it would be shown on would blow them up. This morning, Lori Vallow's uncle, Rex Connor, spoke with the media as he arrived at the courthouse.
So, with that in mind, I typically start off by honoring or paying homage to those who passed at the hands of the person who brought them to their passing. In this instance, I'm going to talk about all of the people on the screen and I'm going to go into the key timeline of events and all the things. But it's very important, and I strategically put the image on the screen so that you can see how wild and how connected Lori is to all of these people, as well as Chad, who we'll be talking about throughout this case. Now, to the left, it's Joseph Ryan. Joseph Ryan is Lori's third husband, or was Lori's third husband. When he passed, they, of course, deemed him as deceased, had his burial, and all of the things. But after these other people were put to their demise, their case for Joseph was actually reopened, his body exhumed, because they wanted to make sure that Lori had nothing to do with his passing. Crazy, right? The second person, who is Charles Vallow, is Lori's fourth husband, or was. He also passed away. And this past week, this is April the 24th, the day that I'm recording this of 2025. But this past week, Lori stood on trial as a representative of herself in court to see if she could get a not guilty for his demise. He and Lori were married at the time of his passing. The next person is Tylee. Tylee is Lori's daughter. She passed at the hands of Lori, and I mean, Lori had hands in her passing. Not that she physically harmed her, or we really don't know. We believe that the brother Alex, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But Tylee Ryan was Lori's daughter from one of her previous marriages. She's actually the daughter of Joseph Ryan. Next is JJ. Now, JJ is the adopted son, and he was adopted by Charles and Lori, right? So in this, it's a lot of names, it's a lot of family tree situations that we have to keep up with. So I'm trying to make sure that I give you the details so you can keep up with the crazy. On the end is Tammy Daybell. Now, Tammy was the wife of a man named Chad, and you'll hear about Chad in just a moment. But I do want you to know that all the people on the four on the end to the right, were brought to their demise at the hands of Lori and Chad. Okay, here we go. So, Joseph Ryan, who again was Lori's third husband, they exhumed his body and it was deemed that he passed of a cardiovascular disease. So, he did pass of natural causes. And I was so glad to hear that because it seems like people who get connected to Lori, they end up kind of getting missing and, passing. So it was good at least that he passed of natural causes. And it was interesting because Lori was still on his paperwork as his next of kin. And she was receiving beneficiary money like Social Security, etc., to his daughter through a joint account. And that's important because we'll talk about her being charged with theft as a part of her convictions. Now, Lore, who you see at the top, Daybell, and Chad Daybell are the two who are working together to bring all of those people who I referenced a minute ago to their demise, except for Joseph. So, here we're talking about in September of 2019, Lori's children, 16-year-old Tylee, who is her daughter with Joseph, and Joshua, aka JJ, they vanished. Okay. And then Lori and her new husband, who you'll understand how their relationship came to be. This is her fifth husband. They claimed that the children were safe, but their whereabouts remain unknown. So we'll start with the story. It's already sounding crazy, but I want to rewind back with the timeline so you can see how everything transpired and built up. So here is the Daybell family tree, and then here's Lori's kind of connection. And I was specific with including this graphic that I found so that you can see how all of these people who were on that second screen were related as it relates to Chad and Lori. So here is what happened. Before we unravel this timeline, I think it's essential to understand the family dynamics. So Lori Vallow Daybell, she is the mother of a young boy named Colby, and he is from a previous marriage. And then there's Ty Lee. They're not young anymore, but just sharing. These are the kids of Lori. And then there's JJ. She's his adoptive mother, and she and Charles, who's her fourth husband, adopted JJ once they got married. Now, Charles Vallow, Lori's fourth husband, and JJ's adoptive father all like work together to take care of their three kids. Now, Chad Daybell, who will become Lori's fifth husband, he was an author of apocalyptic like type novels like End Times, and he was married to a woman named Tammy Daybell. Okay, and so he and his wife had five children. Then we have Alex Cox. Alex Cox is important to this case because he is Lori's brother, and he also is at the root of all of these homicides, but it was like he was manipulated to an extent. Then we have Melanie, and Melanie is Lori's niece, also referred to as a friend throughout the case. And she married a man named Brandon. And Brandon is important in this case. Brandon did not pass away. However, Brandon was attacked by Alex in the situation. So, had Alex been able to actually complete the mission, Brandon would have also been on the screen being the sixth person to have been put to demise. Crazy, right? So here's the timeline. In March of 1990, Chad and Tammy married in Utah, and they eventually had their 5 children. In 2006, Lori marries a man named Charles Vallow, and she brings Colby and Ty Lee into the marriage. Then in 2014, Lori and Charles adopt JJ, the biological grandson of Charles's sister. Her name is Kay Woodcock. So then we have in April of 2018, Joseph's Ryan, who is JJ, and Tylee's father, he dies of a reported heart attack, who we mentioned earlier, Lori's third husband. And then in the fall of 2018, Lori and Melanie begin attending these religious meetings outside of their church. And they're a part of the Church of Latter-day Saints. And then in October of 2018, Lori meets Chad at a religious conference in Utah. And this is like their first in person encounter. And then Lori and Chad appear together on a podcast called Preparing a People. And this was in December of 2018. And then in early 2019, Lori begins to express belief, including that her husband Charles is possessed by an evil spirit or multiple, she says, spirits, and refers to people who have spirits demonically as zombies. And so I'm giving you a quick overview. Charles ends up getting shot. This is Lori's fourth husband in 2019, and he's killed by Lori's brother, Alex. So I'm leaving them on the screen so you can see these people who I'm referring to. Then in September of 2019, Ty Lee is seen for the last time at Yellowstone National Park. They had a picture, like a family picture, and this is the last visible sign they had of Ty Lee. And then in September in 2019, JJ is last seen at his school in Idaho. And so in October of 2019, Tammy, which was Chad's wife, passes away under suspicious circumstances. And so police are asked in like November to do a welfare check on JJ. And then Lori claims that he's with a friend, but the police don't buy it. And then in December, Alex passes in prison of natural causes. And then in 2020 of June, the police and authorities they discover the remains of Tylee and JJ on Chad Daybell's property. That is the big picture timeline of the crazy. But again, I'm going to delve in on some of the specifics. Now, in 2019, Charles, husband number 4, he was concerned about Lori. He was telling the police at some point, and it was caught on camera, that Lori was having these erratic behaviors and she was like being extreme in her religious beliefs. He alleged that Lori basically claimed that he was possessed by an evil spirit named Ned Schneider, and that she was a god preparing for the end of the world. And so in February, Charles actually files for divorce, and he basically um, cites that there was threats on his life, financial misconduct, including that Lori stole $35,000 from their joint accounts. And so, fearing for his safety, which at this point was smart, um, and the well being of his children, he also changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his sister Kay. Now, Lori doesn't know that he calls the life insurance to get it changed. So we already have like a trace of her being hungry for money, as you heard that she stole 35,000 from their joint account. But he also has a $1 million policy, and because she's threatening him, he's fearing for his life. At some point in time, the news report said that they tried to get back together or to reconcile, but he still ended up filing for divorce. Now, he believed that Kay would ensure that the beneficiary money would be used the correct way for the children. And so that's why he switched it to Kay, basically because Lori was acting so crazy. Now, after Charles passed in July of 2019, Lori calls and she's shocked when she finds out that she's no longer the beneficiary on the life insurance policy. Dun dun dun. To be a fly on the wall to have seen her reaction on that one. And so one of the big pieces of her conviction was, or the motives rather, is that she was financially hungry and she wanted to gain wealth through the passing of her husband and then basically just be in a relationship with Chad. And so that was like the conspiracy or the theme behind this. Now, I do want to recognize Kay Woodcock, who is JJ's biological mom, because she played a crucial role in the investigation by reporting the concerns about the missing children. One of the things you'll hear if you follow the case is that JJ would call Kay on FaceTime and the family on FaceTime, and so their last call was very short and very weird. And so that kind of gave a red flag to Kay. And so they also hadn't seen or heard about Tylee. And so that's when they initiated actions to initiate an investigation to find out where the kids were. And it was connected basically to Lori and Chad because their bodies were found on Chad's property. Now, with that in mind, we're going to just look at the timeline so you can see everything kind of coming together. So in 2018, Lori meets Chad, and I have at the top Tammy and Chad, so you know that when they meet, Chad and Tammy are married, and Charles and Lori are still married. And then in 2019, Charles reports Lori and files for divorce. So he had talked to the police. He's like, yo, my wife is having erratic behaviors. I'm reporting her to see if she can, get a mental health evaluation and all the things. Now, Tammy and Chad, remember, they were raising five of their children together at the time. Now, two of Chad's children end up passing. And is that not suspicious? Um, and so after the divorce, uh, Lori is basically waiting on Chad. So Lori was said that she told Charles that she no longer wanted to be with him, didn't care for him, and at some point in time she disappeared for like 58 days, and so the courts was trying to charge her with like alienation or desertion because she left her children, but it later was dismissed. It was later dismissed. Now, Charles went to Arizona's house at the time, so they separated, they divorced. He goes to visit Lori. And because Tylee and JJ were living with Lori, he was supposed to be picking up JJ. And this is in July of 2019. Now, instead of Lori, you know, helping to just do an easy exchange and pick up, taking JJ to school, Alex Cox, which was Lori's brother, shot and killed him. Now, they know that this wasn't like an accident because he had two gunshots to his chest. Now, if it had been one shot, they might would have said, okay, we'll buy it. But the second shot, when they discovered how his body was, it was like somebody hovered over him and shot him intentionally. Lori was trying to claim in the courts that he was trying to attack Alex. that they were getting into like a heated argument and it was self defense, but the evidence didn't show that. And also, when they went to look like for his phone, it wasn't on his person, so that also was weird to the cops. Now, Ty Lee said that she witnessed the confrontation, but that she and JJ left the house before the actual shooting took place. And they actually had the interview recorded of Ty Lee's testimony, but they did not allow it to be admitted into the court. Now, Ty Lee, remember, she disappeared after they've gone to the Yellowstone National Park in 2019, and see how all of these events are building up in 2019. So she met Chad, then the segue into I got to get rid of some people. Because Lori was fixated on these end times and apocalyptic, type deal, and she met Chad, he was like matching her level of crazy. And then in September of 2019, Alex's, which is Lori's brother, the cell phone showed that he had spent hours in Chad and Lori's yard. And that same day, um, there was a text and it said to Tammy to tell her that he had killed like a raccoon and he had buried it in the yard. So I think he wasn't like referring to a real raccoon, but he was talking about the kids. And then in November of 2019, when they were conducting a welfare check for JJ, because Kay is like, I haven't seen my son. At the time, JJ is 7. They discovered that Talia is missing because they're asking Lori and Chad, like, hey, where is JJ? Where's Joshua? And they are not giving like a reasonable response. And so in November, as you can see, JJ is officially said to be missing. And then we have Melanie, who is the niece of Lori. She was staying at her home and she said, I did see JJ, but that was the last confirmed sighting of him. And then the school reported to the police that JJ had unexcused absences. And so Lori tried to cover it up by saying she was homeschooling him now, and that's why they hadn't seen him. So just a hot mess. And then they reported Alex's phone at the Daybell's yard like later again. So I guess he was working in phases of getting the bodies together. And then November, JJ's grandparents, they requested again that welfare check. And that's because when they were calling Lori, she kept telling them like JJ's with Melanie or she's with a friend or JJ's with my friend. But the police they were not buying it. So the attempted murder of Brandon occurred in October. So note, Charles passes, and then we have the disappearance of Tylee. And then Brandon, who was married to Melanie, Lori's niece, ends up being shot at. And he calls the police and he's like, I think I know who tried to shoot me. And they connected it to Alex. Now, it was said that Alex had also been near Brandon's house. So that's how they could confirm that it was him. And one of the friends or the relatives said that he had had like head trauma as a child, and so it like made him sick at the age of 16. So he was someone that could be manipulated and just didn't really think for himself. So I feel like Lori used his brain function to a degree to like manipulate her brother. Now, Tammy in October, this is crazy, before she actually dies, later in October, at the 1st of October in 2019, she calls 911 and she says that a masked man shot at her in her driveway and she thought it was like a paintball gun. And so later, it was indicated that it was Alex who had tried to kill Tammy. And then he follows through, not Alex, but the follow through of her passing ends up happening in October on the 19th. She passes due to like natural causes, but I don't think so. She died in her sleep. So I don't know what Chad did, but when they did her autopsy again, it shared that it was suspicious and it was asphyxiation by suffocation. So at first they were like, okay, well, maybe she just passed some natural causes. But then at a closer autopsy look, they're like, no, she passed and it was suffocation. So Chad and Lori end up getting married in November of 2019. Once Tammy's out of the way, once JJ, Tylee, once Charles is out of the way, then they're able to marry. And they go to Hawaii and they sing Kumbaya. No children are present. And when they come back from their honeymoon, apparently Chad told some neighbors that they didn't have any minor children. And so also in the reports, Chad was working on getting rid of some more of his family. So he had five, but only three children were still living. So yeah, crazy. We are going to now bring it back kind of like full circle present to what happened leading to the verdict. So with that in mind, they ended up filing, this missing report. But Lori and Chad are under microscope by the police. Lori was ordered to produce her missing children in 2020 of January. And then in January on the 30th, she missed the deadline. And that was to like express concern to say, hey, my children are missing. Well, she didn't show up. And then in February, Lori ends up getting arrested in Hawaii. And it was for desertion of her children, and she was resisting officers. She waived her extradition to Idaho, and then she ends up going to prison, and they set her bail at like $1 million, and she couldn't make it. She couldn't make bail. Now, they end up doing an autopsy on Lori's brother, Alex. He ends up passing in prison, and they wanted to make sure that there was nothing crazy that happened to cause his death, but it was determined that it was of natural causes. And then in June on the 9th, they go to Chad's property. They discover the remains of JJ and Tylee and that they were buried in the backyard. So Chad is arrested and then also charged with concealing evidence. So initially, Chad wasn't really caught up in it. It was Lori because she was associated with the kids who were missing. But when they found the bodies on his property, he was charged because the evidence was in his yard. So Lori was charged with conspiracy to destroy or conceal evidence, and then the desertion charges against Lori were dropped, and Lori pled not guilty, and Chad also pled not guilty. And so here are pictures of where Tylee and JJ's remains were found on Lori and Chad's property. And again, Tylee's body was burned, and it was burned so bad that they wouldn't admit it to the viewing for the public. Rather, only the jury could view the images because they were so disturbing. And JJ, he passed, but it said that he was suffocated using like a plastic bag over him. And the tragic part about it is JJ had autism. And so being that he was on the spectrum, the reason why Kate gave him up for adoption was because at the time she couldn't handle, I guess maybe his behaviors or the spectrum in which he was on with his autism. And so I just can't even imagine what these kids went through to their passing. Just crazy. So Lori Daybell's her verdict, she ends up going to court, and it was for conspiracy to commit first degree murder of Tylee, first degree murder of JJ, and first degree murder It was conspiracy to commit on both of them, and then charges for actual first degree murder, and then conspiracy to commit first degree murder on Tammy, and then grand theft. And she was found guilty on all of those charges. Now, I do want to take note that the grand theft was not just um, related to what I shared with Charles. After Tylee and JJ went missing, she was moving money that was coming through like the Social Security for Tylee into the account. She also had used Tylee's phone to send money that was like to her, that said like thank you, but she was sending money to herself to empty out the accounts. Just crazy. And then, as it relates to Chad, he was guilty of 3 counts of first degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and insurance fraud. And he was sentenced to death. Now, what is crazy is this is part one, because in this past week, this is again April 24th, 2025, Lori has been in court, or was in court, because they reached a verdict this week. She was in court representing herself, and the case was solely about the passing of Charles Vallow. So, as you recall at the very beginning, I showed 5 people. The charges, and I'll go back really quickly. The charges that I just read across that Lori and Chad received were for the people who are on the right. So everybody here on the right, except for Charles. So Tylee, JJ, and Tammy were who they were getting convicted for in the guilties. Charles's case is the part two, because they determined that that was not an accidental homicide, that wasn't an accidental shooting, that he intentionally was killed in order for her to get that $1 million policy, and so that she and Chad could go off into the sunset and live happily ever after. So Lori was charged in connection with Charles's death, and that's what case was going on this past week. Now, if you've made it all the way through those details regarding Lori and Chad, thank you. Thank you for hanging in there. This is a longer one than usual, but Lori Vallow Daybell's descent from being a mother to being a convicted murderer serves as a chilling reminder of how extreme beliefs and manipulative relationships can culminate in unimaginable tragedies. Her actions, alongside those of her husband, Chad Daybell, not only led to the loss of innocent lives, but also left a lasting impact on the communities they touched. Now, as we reflect on this case, it is crucial to recognize the warning signs of destructive ideologies and the importance of seeking help when faced with manipulative or controlling relationships. And I say that because when they were looking at the relationship of Chad and Lori were saying that they were like soulmates, and they just met in the wrong timing, but they were making their connection right by killing off the people who they were married to at one time or another, saying these people were zombies, saying they were filled with evil spirits, and they were writing their own message to their apocalyptic beliefs. Now, I don't know about the Church of Latter day Saints, but this sounds a bit crazy. I mean, no disrespect, but this sounds crazy. So if you are a part of that organization or religious group, let me know, how far fetched is this? Inquiring minds want to know. Now, as always, I usually leave off with 2 questions. How can individuals safeguard themselves and their loved ones from the influence of extremist beliefs within close relationships? So if I meet someone and they say, "Hey, I'm a Christian too," and we start having a conversation, and because we say we're Christians, do I just acknowledge that, or should I dig deep and figure out if we really align in our beliefs? Because this shows the power of influence. They both were a part of the Church of Latter day Saints, but Chad was a bit extreme and Lori was too. So 2 people coming together that were on extremes led to this crazy. What do you think about that? What can we do? Second question: what measures can communities implement to identify and intervene in situations where individuals exhibit concerning behaviors? And I'll give an example. Kay, in this instance, did end up reporting to the police, like, hey, I need you to do a welfare check on my son. But prior to this, Melanie, the friend that was interviewed, or Brandon, the in law, he was saying they were acting weird at the Christmas party, or they were saying some crazy stuff about people being zombies. So when you start having concerns, or when she confided and said, or Charles confided in Brandon at some point and said, hey, she's threatening to kill me. When you hear those things, what do you do with that information? You know? Now, your insights and experiences are invaluable, so please share your thoughts in the comments below to foster a community of awareness and support. Y'all have been doing a great job on the previous podcasts and episodes, so let's keep it going. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for our next episode where we'll delve into part 2 of Lori's Arizona trial, where she's being or was tried for Charles's demise. She represented herself, which is crazy, and the implications that it had on the proceedings. Now, I'm going to end off with something that's funny to me, because what we talk about is kind of dark in this series, because we're talking about red flags that have brought people to their passing. But I had this guy that I work with, and he said you can be in a room and say, for example, there one person is crazy, so the female is crazy and she's on the left hand side of the room, and the guy is crazy and he's on the right hand side of the room. By the end of the night, somehow they're gonna connect. And I just think sometimes the connection, it just happens at the most unopportune times, and other people are affected. Until next time, you all stay safe and keep checking for those red flags.